In July 2020, British Airways operated the world's largest Boeing 747-400 fleet, 31 aircraft that had just received millions of pounds in cabin refurbishments, new entertainment screens, freshly installed carpets, restored seats. Just a year earlier, 3 of these jumbos had been repainted in historic liveries to celebrate the airline's centenary, a tribute that would make any aviation museum envious. And then, in 16 days, it was all over. On July 17, 2020, British Airways announced that all its 747s would be retired immediately. Not gradually by 2024 as planned, immediately. Aircraft that had flown commercially weeks before were now scrap. The decision was irreversible. BA wasn't alone in its grim forecast. KLM also retired its 747s. Air France eliminated its A380s. Lufthansa parked its entire super jumbo fleet in the Spanish desert. The consensus was unanimous. Aviation would never be the same. The post-pandemic world would be one of reduced travel, virtual conferences, and permanently suppressed demand. Everyone was wrong. If you're also passionate about the world of aviation, consider subscribing to the channel and supporting our team. When demand for international travel exploded between 2022 and 2023, airlines around the world panicked. Lufthansa, which had sworn never to operate the A380 again, brought all 8 remaining aircraft back into service. Korean Air kept its 747-8s flying to serve packed transatlantic routes. Even Qatar Airways, whose CEO had openly criticized the A380's costs, reactivated its super jumbo fleet. British Airways, however, didn't have that option. Its 747s had been dismantled, sold to become movie sets, converted into party venues, or simply scrapped. And the bill for that decision is still being paid. In 2020, when the world still didn't know what lay ahead, British Airways had a clear plan for its 747 fleet. Since 2019, the airline had been refurbishing 18 of the aircraft with new entertainment systems, LED lighting, and renovated interiors. These refurbishments were part of a £6.5 billion investment in customer experience. The last 747 was scheduled to leave the fleet in February 2024, a gradual transition that would allow BA to absorb new aircraft and maintain capacity during the changeover. Then came March 2020.
The Centers for Disease Control says the coronavirus is going to spread in the United States.
One person with coronavirus in King County, Washington State, has died.
9 Americans now have died. 11 people have died from coronavirus.
Within weeks, global air traffic collapsed by more than 90%. IAG, British Airways' parent company, recorded an operating loss of €7.4 billion in 2020, compared to a profit of €2.6 billion in 2019. Passenger revenue fell 75%. British Airways alone lost £3.9 billion. The pressure to cut costs was immense, and the 747 fleet, with its 4 fuel-thirsty engines, became an obvious target. Alex Cruz, then CEO of British Airways, announced the decision with evident regret. This is not how we wanted or expected to say goodbye to our incredible 747 fleet. It's a heartbreaking decision. The logic seemed irrefutable at the time. The 747-400 consumes approximately 3,240 gallons of fuel per hour, nearly 14,400 liters. The Boeing 787 Dreamliner and Airbus A350, on the other hand, are about 25 to 30% more fuel efficient per passenger. In a world where every penny counted for survival, retiring older aircraft seemed like the rational choice. But there was a problem BA severely underestimated: replacement. BA wasn't simply retiring its 747s. It was betting that it would have new aircraft to replace them when demand returned, and that bet depended on two manufacturers, Boeing and Airbus. In 2019, IAG had ordered up to 42 Boeing 777X for British Airways, 18 firm orders and 24 options. The expectation was to receive the first aircraft in 2022. These would be the direct replacements for the 747s, high-capacity aircraft for busy long-haul routes. But the 777X never arrived in 2022, nor in 2023, nor in 2024, nor in 2025. The 777X program became one of the greatest development disasters in commercial aviation history. Problems with the GE9X engines, the largest engine ever built for commercial aviation, forced redesigns. During extreme pressurization testing in 2019, a door blew out before test flights had even begun. Issues with flight control systems suspended testing in 2020. The 737 MAX crisis diverted regulatory attention and engineering resources from Boeing. And then came the workers' strike in 2024. In October 2025, Boeing announced yet another delay. The 777X would not enter commercial service before 2027, 7 years behind the original schedule. The Boeing 787 situation didn't help either. British Airways expected to receive 12 787-10s between 2020 and 2023. In reality, it received only 2, delivered on 3 consecutive days in June 2020 before quality problems in Boeing's production halted all deliveries for more than a year. The result? When demand for international travel began to explode in mid-2022, British Airways had a huge hole in its long-haul capacity. The 747s were gone, and their replacements didn't exist. The speed of recovery caught virtually the entire industry by surprise. In 2022, global passenger air traffic grew 47% compared to 2021. European international traffic jumped 22% in 2023 compared to the previous year. By December 2023, global traffic had reached 97.5% of December 2019 levels, and in some regions and routes, it had already surpassed pre-pandemic numbers. Pent-up demand was real and massive. People had spent 2 years stuck at home dreaming of travel. Personal savings had grown during lockdowns, and when borders reopened, the rush was overwhelming. Airlines that had kept their high-capacity aircraft, even if parked, had an immediate advantage. Lufthansa is the clearest example of this reversal. In June 2022, Lufthansa CEO Carsten Spohr publicly admitted he had changed his position on the A380. The airline, which had declared the Super Jumbo dead, announced it would bring all 8 remaining A380s back into service. The first returned to operations in June 2023. The reason was simple: strong demand combined with delays in new aircraft deliveries. Lufthansa was also expecting Boeing 777Xs. It didn't receive them either. The difference is that Lufthansa still had an ace up its sleeve: its A380s, parked but preserved. Customer demand has dramatically risen, Lufthansa said in a statement. Combined with the delay in delivery of ordered aircraft, we need to reactivate the A380 fleet. Korean Air followed similar logic. It kept its Boeing 747-8s in operation, using them for high-demand routes between Seoul and destinations like Atlanta, London, and New York. In April 2025, Korean Air operated the longest route in the world served by a passenger 747, 7,172 miles between Seoul and Atlanta, offering 33% more capacity than the Boeing 777-300 that had previously operated the route.
British Airways, for its part, improvised as best it could. In October 2021, the airline announced the return of its Airbus A380s, the 12 aircraft that, unlike the 747s, had been preserved rather than permanently retired. The first A380s returned to service in December 2021, flying to Los Angeles, Miami, and Dubai. But 12 A380s don't replace 31 Boeing 747s. BA resorted to unusual measures. In 2022 and 2023, the airline used Boeing 787s and 777s on short-haul European routes, Frankfurt, Madrid, Amsterdam, to maximize cargo and passenger capacity. It hired aircraft and crews from Titan Airways to operate routes it couldn't cover on its own. And it spent billions accelerating orders for new aircraft. In May 2025, IAG announced a massive order, 71 wide-body aircraft totaling more than $21 billion, 32 Boeing 787-10s for British Airways, 21 Airbus A330-900 NEOs for other group airlines, plus 6 A350-1000s and 6 additional Boeing 777-9s for BA, the largest wide-body order in IAG's history. This purchase wasn't a sign of prosperity. It was an admission of deficit. British Airways was racing to fill a hole it had created 5 years earlier. The final irony lies in the numbers. In its first half 2024 report, British Airways stated that its capacity had reached 92.7% of 2019 levels. It sounds like recovery, until you read the footnote. This is higher than the 88.1% of 2019 capacity operated in the same period of 2023, as pre-pandemic levels are gradually restored following the retirement of the Boeing 747-400 fleet in 2020. 5 years later. For context, the Boeing 747-400 carried up to 345 passengers in British Airways configuration. The airline operated 31 of these aircraft. That represents potential capacity of more than 10,000 seats per day on long-haul routes, seats that disappeared overnight in July 2020 and took half a decade to be partially replaced. The new aircraft are more efficient, no doubt. The A350 consumes about 25 to 30% less fuel per passenger than the 747-400. The 787 offers similar savings. In the long run, fleet modernization was inevitable and correct, but the timing was catastrophic. British Airways prematurely retired its older aircraft based on the premise that demand would remain depressed for years. When that premise proved wrong, the airline had no plan B. It had no 747s to reactivate. It had no 777Xs arriving to replace them. It was trapped between an irreversible decision from the past and delays in the future over which it had no control. British Airways planned its fleet transition assuming Boeing and Airbus would deliver aircraft on time. Both failed. The 777X is 7 years late. The 787 had deliveries halted for more than a year. BA didn't control these variables, but bet on them as if they were certain. Today, British Airways is recovering. Its A350s and 787s form the core of a modern, efficient fleet. The $21 billion investment in new aircraft will eventually bear fruit, and demand for air travel remains robust. But the question no one at IAG will answer publicly is how much the July 2020 decision cost. How much in lost revenue during years of insufficient capacity? How much in premiums paid to accelerate deliveries? How much in market share ceded to competitors who kept their high-capacity aircraft? The Queen of the Skies made her final British Airways flight in October 2020. 2 747s took off from Heathrow simultaneously, crossing paths over the airport in a choreographed farewell broadcast live to aviation enthusiasts around the world. It was meant to be a graceful goodbye to an era of aviation. It ended up being a goodbye to billions of pounds of capacity that British Airways would desperately need just 2 years later.